So, hello, dear Tatiana. I'm very glad to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Today, Tatiana Tyukaeva, a research fellow at Primakov Institute of World, is our guest. So, Tatiana, if you don't mind, I would like to switch on onto our questions. So, it's also widely known that lots of facts have already occurred in our today's world. And lots of acts, lots of events have also taken place in the region of Near East. The very first question of mine will be associated with what is going on in Near East, and namely in Palestine. From your point of view of the specialist, how do you assess the current state of the Palestine, especially in light of what did recently happen when Israel eliminated the leaders of Hezbollah and Hamas, those organizations that are very tied with Iran, and those organizations that have been very operational because of the influence of Iran. What do you see as the most realistic path to achieve a sustainable peace in this region?
Yes, this is a very interesting question, actually. Well, I would like to start with Hamas and Hezbollah, as you rightly noticed, that they have actually been weakened militarily, which is very important to stress. As a result, as the recent retaliation attacks conducted by Israel and a series of assassinations of key leaders of these organizations. And definitely, yes, Iran's regional positions also have been weakened, obviously. For these two organizations were a very important part in the so-called axis of resistance headed by Iran. But it is very important to stress that what is happening in Palestine, in these domestic dynamics of Palestinian political, social, etc., it's quite separate of what those organizations, like Hezbollah, and what Iran has been doing and what they're trying to do, because Hezbollah has its own agency, as well as Hamas has its own agency. They have their own interests, mainly domestic in the domestic politics, obviously. And Hezbollah and Iran, well, they don't really and didn't have much to say in what Hamas is doing and what is happening in Palestine. And they didn't have really much influence, well, apart from obviously Iran's support for Hamas. So when we talk about current state of the Palestinian national movement and Palestinian politics in general, it's important to notice that it has been in a very deep crisis for years, actually. And it's worsening. And we have to talk about the leadership crisis, the crisis of legitimacy of this leadership, and when we talk about the two main political powers, right? In Palestine, it's Hamas and Fatah, which is led by Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen. And he obviously controls the national authority, the Palestinian National Authority, without any checks and balances, without any judiciary or legislative bodies. And it's all under his personal control, and including by the way, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which has also become under his personal control. So now that neither of these two powers, Hamas and the PNA, the National Administration, managed to come up with some efficient strategy, efficient and plausible, of how to solve the Palestinian problem, because the Palestinian problem is obviously still there and nobody's doing anything about it. And what they have been doing is only exacerbating the living conditions of their own people, of Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, obviously. And we can see that in the support rates, the results of regular polls conducted by Palestinian Research Center. So the support rates for both of them have been significantly dropping. It has been going on for years, obviously. So about more than 80% of Palestinians demand Abbas's resignation. And in the West Bank, it's even higher. It's about 90% of people. So people in Gaza, if we talk about Gaza, they have been suffering from Israeli retaliation attacks and bombings that always follow after Hamas provocatory rocket firing against Israel. We've been witnessing this for years. Obviously, ever since they came to power in 2006 and 2007, the blockade began. Then the majority of Gaza, they do not support violence. These are the results of the polls conducted before the 7th of October last year. So the majority do not support violence. They are against the Hamas breaking the ceasefire with Israel because they know what's coming next, because they are the ones who actually suffer. Then before the 7th October attack of Hamas, and now again, because the figures are actually changing always. So the support for Hamas was about 20 to 30%. And this support is mostly coming from West Bankers. And this is, again, as a demonstration of disapproval with Abbas. It doesn't necessarily mean that they support Hamas. It's a little more complicated logic than we actually perceive of the majority. And again, before the 7th of October, the PNA and Fatah had about 20% of support, and it was dropping always. Another very important thing to say here also is that the majority of those who supported or somehow approved of what Hamas did on the 7th of October, they do not actually support Hamas per se, but they believe that what Hamas did actually helped bring the Palestinian problem to the front of international agenda, that people internationally, globally are starting seeing what is going on, what's happening, in what conditions Palestinians live, etc., etc. So they are not actually supporting Hamas, but they pleased that this helped bring the problem to the front of everyone's attention. So concluding, and my point is, if we talk about any possibilities of achieving in some future, very far probably from now, some sustainable peace agreement, or even better, to find solution to the Palestinian problem, one of the two most vital obstacles, as I see it, is the Palestinian leadership crisis, as I've mentioned. So there has to be some kind of reform, political reform. So there has to be some working effectively political bodies established. There has to be working administration, political management, and there has to be, most importantly, there have to be leaders, Palestinian leaders, who actually want to solve the problem, because I don't actually see any of those at the moment. So the second obstacle is obviously the Israeli stance on the issue, but not the Israeli stance actually, but the stance of a series of Israeli right-wing, increasingly radical Israeli cabinets, and the current one actually tops them all from the point of view of radicalism. Again, these cabinets have failed to formulate any effective, efficient strategy in dealing with the Palestinians, other than oppression, spread of dehumanization of Palestinians, etc., use of force, and so on. So there has to be a change in Israeli approach, or probably. Well, I don't see this actually happening with the current cabinet, Israeli cabinet, but probably there will be some change sometime. This will also help to find a way to achieve or talk about achieving sustainable peace agreement.
Tatiana, let's switch on to United Arab Emirates regional strategy. This country has been increasingly assertive in its foreign policy, especially in Yemen and Libya. How do you evaluate the United Arab Emirates military and diplomatic interventions in the region, and what are the broad implications for regional stability?
Yes, right. Also, very urgent issue and very interesting actually to watch it develop. So the previous decades witnessed major, unprecedented Emiratis regional military and political activities. The military is actually of special importance. So the UAE has been trying to assert itself as a regional power, willing to use its force to stand by what it believes, to stand by its interests, to assert their interests, to fight for their interests, including military ways of dealing with this. So we've seen very active military involvement in Libya and Yemen, as you said, so most prominently, but also in Sahel, because they conducted counterterrorism organization operation, there, mostly in cooperation with Egypt, France, sometimes Russia. But there has been some change recently. So by the early 2020s, we have started to see some shifts, not in the interests of the UAE in the region, but in the ways they want to implement them, to assert their interests. The key goal of the UAE or of the Emirati leadership is to progress with their domestic economic and social development strategies, very ambitious, as we all know. So they have been outlined in a number of documents, a series of documents. They started in 2005, I think, and they still continue. It's so documents such as Vision 2021, National Agenda 2021, the UAE Centennial 2071, the Principles of 50, and the latest one is the We Are the UAE, which is also like a vision 2031. So they need to do this, to successfully achieve their economic and social transformation goals. They need a stable regional environment. They've come to realize that. So this realization underpinned the shift in the methods from military to prominently promoting regional cooperation, peace, security in the wide sense of it, just not just military security or political security, it's also food security, energy security, logistics, etc., etc. Actually, realization of this kind also came to other regional players, well, major regional players such as Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey, Egypt, to name a few. And we have seen this implemented in a series of normalization efforts, like the normalization with Israel, some Arab countries, especially the UAE, a thaw in Iran-Saudi relations, reconciliation within the Gulf. We've seen reconciliatory efforts towards Assad's regime, well, former Assad's regime. So the accent in the Emirati foreign policy is building bridges, so to say, promoting interconnectivity projects, in logistics, transportation, food, energy security, etc., etc. They've been very successful in this. It's actually their like hallmark of the UAE, the connectivity projects, interconnectivity projects, etc. So they are promoting this idea, and they're promoting the idea of building a regional security architecture, where the key regional players, the UAE, obviously, then the Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Iran, maybe even Israel, these regional players, they define their own agenda and their own interests and ways of implementation of these interests, with a set of external powers, external actors, such as US, China, Russia, some European countries, and the EU like a group, facilitating the implementation of the goals that are set by the regional powers, regional players, and at the same time counterbalancing each other, so that there would be no external or regional internal monopoly or any dictate from any sole power, be it regional or external. So we may consider the UAE sort of a positive force in enhancing regional stability, prosperity. They're very interested in conflict resolution, post-crisis reconstruction, economic development, prosperity, etc., etc.
Tatiana, the next question of mine will be associated with Qatar. So let's be talk about Qatar's foreign policy. This country has been involved in numerous diplomatic initiatives, including mediation efforts and conflicts across the region. How would you characterize Qatar's approach to foreign policy, and what role do you see it's playing in Middle Eastern geopolitics in the coming years?
Actually, Qatar's foreign policy is a phenomenon that deserves much attention. Very fascinating, very impressive for such a tiny country. You hardly find on the map sometimes. So the grand architect behind this ambitious and extremely successful, in my view, foreign policy was Sheikh Hamad. He's the previous Emir of Qatar and the father of the current Emir of Qatar, Tamim. Since, well, I'd say early 90s, even before he became the Emir of Qatar, he shaped the global image of his country. With all its beneficial outcomes that we can observe today with what Tamim has been doing. So he actually created the global brand of Qatar. This was what was one of his goals, one of his missions as he saw it. So what is brand of Qatar? So it's Qatar is a progressive modern state, very active regional and global player, key global gas exporter, obviously, major global investor. I stress the word global everywhere, but it's true. So it's center of global attention, where many huge international events are held, sports events, cultural events, even some diplomatic, political events. Active proponent of many of the key international agendas such as climate change, other environmental issues, etc. And of course, one of the most important and a hallmark of Qatar is the Qatar as an indispensable, very important mediator, both regionally and globally. We've actually seen those mediation activities for years, even before the 90s, in Africa, in Asia, and in the Middle East. Obviously, they weren't always successful, and the success wasn't always held for a long time, but still they were there as a mediator. And the role that Qatar is still playing today under the leadership of Sheikh Tamim, albeit the slightly less daring, probably, and audacious, probably possible to say, tone that his father took. Qatar acts globally. Qatar sees the world as multipolar, polycentric, probably better to say, and that is why Qatar considers it very important to engage in cooperation with major powers. They may be regional powers, they may be global powers, whatever. And it is very important for their security on the one hand, and the image that has been created to develop these bilateral relations. The accent is here with key global actors in different parts of the world. Another thing about the Qatari foreign policy is that Qatar tends to act independently, unilaterally, on their own as a separate player. unlike, for example, Saudi Arabia or the UAE, for example, who prefer multilateral actions about building coalitions, etc. What can we expect to see Qatar? We can expect to see Qatar continue playing this role of major investor, major mediator. We're already seeing it in the involvement in the negotiations between Hamas and Israel, for example. Some of the outcomes were actually successful, very productive and helpful. I don't think that their goal actually is to solve the Palestinian problem, although they've positioned themselves from the beginning of Hamad's rule as one of the key, well, not one of the key proponents of the Palestinian cause. But if a solution is found if the solution is found, they would definitely want to be part of it, among the ones who solve the problem, because the Palestinian problem is of very special importance in the region and in the world, actually. So the key is to position itself as an important actor and a positive force in the region, in the world. It's very important for their image because they see it very important for their security, first and foremost, and also economic development.
Saudi Arabia is the next on my list, so let's switch onto the domestic reform, Saudi Arabia's domestic reform agenda. Under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabia has pursued ambitious domestic reforms like Vision 2030. What are the main challenges in implementing those reforms, and how have they affected the domestic political landscape, especially concerning the role of the monarchy and political dissent?
Yeah, this is very interesting to talk about also. But before we talk about the obstacles and probably challenges, I would like to say that the Saudis basically followed the path laid by Qatar and the UAE in the way that they had already introduced a similar transformation strategy before Saudis did. So the change started in Saudi Arabia with the change of the leadership, obviously, in 2015, when King Salman came to power, and his son, Mohammed Salman, swiftly became the key figure in defining Saudi's national interests, foreign policy, strategies, methods, actually all the whole set. And so he is very much, on the same wave with the Saudi youth, who are actually the majority of the kingdom's population. They very much approve of what he's doing because they see eye to eye with him. So the strategy, the Vision 2030, mostly concentrates on economic transformations. Economic, again, in a very wide sense. So the goal is to build a modern, progressive, knowledge-based, innovation-based, technology-based economy. It also obviously implies certain social transformations. Again, if we talk about social, the most noticeable changes can be seen in the transformation of the role of religion and the role of the clerics, who traditionally promote very conservative Islamic norms, interpretations and visions, etc., and had very great influence on the monarchy, on the king, and on the political system and foreign policy as well. So apart from the goals of economic and social development and transformations, the idea was also to limit the influence of these clerics on politics, and also to assert the positions of Mohammed bin Salman within the ruling family and at the helm of the kingdom. If we talk about progress, there is certainly been some progress in these reforms, in implementing the strategy Vision 2030. For example, in developing non-oil parts of the economy, technological progress, attracting foreign investments, changing the perception of Saudi Arabia. And Hamdan Salman always stresses that Islam is moderate, we promote moderate Islam, etc. And the status of women, I would say. But obviously there are obstacles and challenges. I would like to point out the key three ones that I see as most important. So the first one is the transformations in Saudi Arabia are moving rather slowly, but it's because they're just beginning. They're just in the beginning of this path of transformations and new modern development, if we can say so. The second one is that they have a very interesting approach. They like everything grand. They like everything big and bright and the biggest and the brightest and all. Unlike the UAE, for example, who they did it very gradually, step by step, increasing slowly the number of spheres where they progress, develop, etc. So now we see the big success. So Saudis tend to act grand. For example, we all know or heard about the huge multi-billion-dollar projects such as NEOM, part of Vision 2030. They're very difficult to implement. They're not very feasible, and they require very huge and very long-term investments with rather unclear prospects, unclear for the investments, potential investments. So we've already seen that they've cut down the funding of the line, which is part of the NEOM. So this is another problem. So they want it to be big, and now it's not possible to be that big and in such a short time. And the third thing is that this is actually common for the UAE and Qatar also. Transformations are not implied in political sphere. It's only about economy, technologies, economy, or economy in a very large sense. No political debates, no civil societies. They do not actually try to develop that, to work on that. The monarchies, in their view, in the view of the leaders of the monarchies, they remain strong. They remain assertive in domestic politics. And even become more authoritarian. We can see that there are the group of people who take part in making decisions, foreign policy decisions, domestic policy decisions, economic decisions, is becoming smaller and smaller. It's the leader and the small group of his colleagues, let's say that, the close circle, very close circle. And this, the absence of political transformation or any efforts in this direction can be a challenge in the future. We don't know when, but how are the leaders going to deal with the social demand for political reform? Because we assume that if the society is changing, because these changes are necessary for changes in the economy, they will probably start thinking differently, maybe. Maybe there could be some changes in business culture, for example, social connections, ties, and the way the whole basis of societies in the monarchies or in the Gulf monarchies can be changed very seriously. But we don't know what's going to happen. Let's wait and see.
So, Tatiana, now I'm switching on to our last question. We have already discussed all those previous countries, and thanks to you, we have delved in all those countries in that very, really important region. and have had some sort of journey or trip onto those countries. So the last question of mine will be some sort of combined question regarding to all those countries: Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and United Arab Emirates relations. In recent years, there has been a throw in relations between Qatar and its Gulf neighbors, particularly after the 2017 blockade. Do you think the Gulf Cooperation Council will fully recover? And what role do you anticipate Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates will play in shaping the region's future, particularly regarding their approach to Iran?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I wanted to point out that obviously, as we all know, that the problems with Qatar or between Qatar and his Qatar's neighbors started didn't start in 2014 to 2017. There was a long history about that, about the disapproval of Saudi Arabia, of the UAE, of Qatar's behavior, regional policies, their audacity, etc., etc. Having said all that, despite all that, the council was still there. Right. Then another thing important to note is that the blockade and the Qatar crisis, didn't end because Qatar made some concessions or implemented any of the demands that were imposed on Qatar by the neighboring countries, the Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So the blockade was obviously a failure from day one. Still, reconciliation happened. It came in early 2021. It was part of the general reconciliation in the region as part of the realization or by the leaders of regional powers that conflicts and tensions, the blockades, use of force, military or otherwise, they all are inefficient, costly, and they only lead to spread of violence, more conflicts, more tensions, more destabilization, which again blocks the economic development and prosperity in the region. Another thing important to notice in this regard is that the Gulf monarchies, all the three of them mainly, but all the six actually, they still see the Gulf Cooperation Council as one of the pillars of their security, along with all the others, the cooperation with the US, cooperation with Russia, with China, with Europe, their domestic economic development, building self-sufficiency, etc., etc. So all the three monarchies that we are discussing today are very influential. They are very vital regional actors, regional powers. They're actively working on de-escalation, conflict resolution, still projecting their power, their influence far beyond their borders and the borders of the region, the Middle East. They aim to build a regional architecture that will serve their interest. Of course, they're all doing it in their own manner, own strategies and methods. As we talked about, the UAE, who are asserting connectivity projects and playing an integral part in this network of connectivity in the region and beyond. Then Qatar, who's always acting unilaterally, asserting their image, their brand as a force of good and progress. And then the Saudis that are only beginning their transformation path and are concentrating on building their modern economy, developing their economy, but they're still trying to remain in the headlines of global media, in the spot of global attention, and assert their leadership role. As for Iran, I believe that all the three tend to see it as a part of this regional architecture that they're trying to build. trying to shape. And as we all know, some of the monarchies, especially Qatar, for example, and the UAE, they have a history of relations with Iran. For example, Qatar historically has been developing economic, political ties with Iran than the UAE, despite their very harsh position and perception of the Iranian threat because of the Iranian regional activities. The UAE has been developing actually economic trade and investment ties for over 20 years now. And again, we all know that the role that the UAE has played in helping Iran, helping the Iranian economy in the conditions of sanctions. So I believe that concerning this realization of the monarchies and all the other regional powers, that it is important to cooperate, even if everybody has their own interests. It's important to cooperate, to find the common ground, etc. I believe that their intentions of integrating Iran into this regional architecture that they're trying to build can be successful.
Thank you so much for those extended and profound answers to all the questions that have warned us, Tatiana. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.